Hi, Niel Hiscox with Canadian Auto Dealer Magazine, again with Chuck Seguin doing our weekly Friday conversation. Chuck, in one of our previous discussions in terms of planning this series going forward, we thought it would be useful to tell differentiated stories based on the type of dealer out there and how they are being impacted, how they're responding, and what their opportunity is going forward. The reality is a big urban market store has got a different story than a smaller rural store. And we thought this week we'd start really looking at the situation out there from the standpoint of one of those specific stories. So to start off with, why don't we look at the story, look at the situation for a smaller rural dealer and what we think they're facing over the next little while.
Sure, Neil, that's great, and good to see you on a wonderful sunny Friday in May now, where we moved the calendar another day. Yeah, there are differences out there. There's no question. The smaller dealers or dealers in rural towns, I guess, is more of a proper way to describe them. Are a bit of a mixed bag. Some have been doing quite well throughout this pandemic. Some have remained open from a sales standpoint. Some have remained not so much from an online sales standpoint and from a service standpoint. I think many are surprised and maybe caught off guard a little bit about the acceptance of online types of transactions, online types of discussions with customers. And many felt that it would be probably a number of years before that type of phenomena would impact their small community. But in actual fact, that's the way most people are starting to do their shopping, regardless of where they are. So that's been a bit of a surprise. But the overriding feeling in small rural Canada is that they've thrived on relationships. They've been, and often they're the only brand of their brand in town. They're the only store. So if you're the single point Ford store or single point GM store or single point Toyota store in a market, you have a real close-knit community, and that close-knit community has been very supportive of the dealers, as the dealers have been very supportive of those communities. So I think you're going to see them bounce back pretty quickly. The social distancing causes, depending on what the rules of the various province that they happen to be in, the social distancing could cause some of them a bit of a problem in that their dealerships are pretty small. They make 2, 3, 4 car showrooms in some cases. Not an awful lot of office space, no meeting space per se. Drive-throughs, some of them have them, some of them don't. So the ability for a service advisor to go outside and whatever may have to be how they're going to do some of that stuff. But the small guys, by and large, are pretty optimistic that they're going to come through this pretty well unscathed. A lot of the communities have not had a COVID incident, so it's a pretty good. It's not a bad environment. I haven't heard anybody in that environment struggling terribly. Most of them were going to apply for the 75% wage subsidies, going to do the programs, and that's going to give them the cash flow. But they're all looking forward to a pretty quick bounce. It's winter tire season coming off, so they're getting lots of phone calls if their service operations are still open. And so, if there's any concern, it's that we're going to go through a bit of a peak with the pent-up demand in the tire changes and oil changes and brake jobs and whatever. And then once they get through that things may in fact calm down. Not quite sure after that original peak what the outlook is going to be, say in June, July, August, September. So there's that concern. Some stores have got employment issues in their province. So that has, like the oil and gas folks in small town Alberta, or if you're in northern Quebec, you've got some issues. But by and large, I think they're pretty well optimistic and looking to get back to business.
As we get at that, actually mirrors some of what I've been hearing too. It's interesting. I've heard from a number of stores that have said that on the service side, the whole winter tire, summer tire changeover is as busy as usual, and so they've definitely been hopping. They wonder what comes after that, but that's definitely kept them busy. Let's talk a little bit about from an inventory standpoint. I mean, to some degree, the smaller market stores, they may not have the depth of inventory that a larger urban store does. So some of the what's the implications from an inventory standpoint that may either position them a bit better or offer more of a challenge as the industry has to ramp back up?
Well, the challenge for all dealers, regardless of size, as they look out their windows or they drive by their stores, whether they're open or not, there's lots of inventory on the ground. You think of when we were getting started with this, they were just beginning to ramp up their spring inventories, and so most dealers have got a fair bit, and floor plans. Granted, the interest in many cases have been deferred, but those things are going to become real expenses as those deferrals become more prevalent and begin to reverse themselves. So dealers are trying to sell out of inventory as much as they possibly can, trying to minimize dealer trades, and it's been impossible to do dealer trades because nobody's been open on the retail side. So if you're not selling the inventory you've got, or you're over inventoried, if you happen to have 150 pickup trucks because you're looking for a real hot March and April, those are still there by and large, and causing a few sleepless nights in terms of what are they going to do. The used inventory is something that is a concern because nobody knows what those future values are going to be. So where you have the benefit of OEM incentives to stimulate the economy to try to get people to buy their new inventory, that has a significant downward effect on used vehicle values. So some of the smaller dealers could be stuck with some of that inventory that they haven't been able to move, and may not be able to move it at a profit, or might have to take a loss. But my recommendation has been to get rid of the used vehicle inventory as fast as you can, because that's frozen cash, and if you've got a cash issue, try to get rid of it so that you can convert that inventory to cash, and then take advantage when the prices come back down to retool your inventory.
I want to talk a bit on the service side. I think even in smaller markets, and even in markets where they may not have had a lot of cases, they're still going to be selling to a consumer that's going to have a level of nervousness around the virus, and they're still going to have to be looking at things like low touch or touchless ways to work with customers. On the service side, is something like remote service, satellite service easier to implement in a small market where you don't have, the traffic issues that you would have in a large city, or the radius of service?
Yeah, it is easier. You don't have the distances and you don't have the traffic, but you still have the cost. So remote service is not an inexpensive exercise, but it is an option in a small town. So if your neighbor needs that, you can go to his do things in his driveway. Same as across town, but across town's a 5-minute drive. So it depends on the size of the community. But the whole concern that I'm having right now, as I start to take a look at some of the provincial requirements that are coming out, is that our health and safety requirements that are going to be templated on top of already our workplace safety requirements are going to be substantial. And even if you're in a small town, the rules are the same as if you're in a big town. So you're going to have those sanitizing stations and all of the things that are required are going to be provincial mandated. So even if you don't have a COVID incident in your community, you're still going to have to go through COVID protocols in your store, and your brand may very well require you to do that as well, which all means, if in a small store, more cost, spending more money, having possibly unproductive people that you have to have on your payroll, and that unless you can increase prices to accommodate for that, it means lower profits.
Talk a bit about technology. You know, we've talked so much about the change that technology is going to enable as a result of this, and you know, more of an online sales path. This is going to be a catalyst in a whole bunch of different areas, and we've touched on many of them from a technology standpoint. One of the things I've sometimes found as you deal with dealers in smaller markets, and it cycles back to what you said at the beginning, it's always been a relationship-based business, and I've been at different provincial dealer association conferences and things where, you know, after a presentation about how technology is changing the business, I've sometimes had conversations with dealers from smaller markets who've said, I just don't see that happening in my market. I just don't see that happening as quickly for us. So to me, it seems that there's both an attitude towards technology and frankly, I think in some smaller rural markets, access to technology or access to the field staff that you're going to need to help you implement technology that could be more of a challenge. Talk a little bit about both of those, both the attitude to and the access to technology, and how that may be different in a small market.
Well, it's certainly in a small market, the general, and I've had those same types of conversations that you have, the general belief is a lot of the things that are talked about, you know, the new age retail world and all that sort of stuff are not going to be there. One of the things that the pandemic has done, I think, has taught dealers of all shapes and sizes that consumers are now thinking differently. Governments are now taking a bigger role in how we're going to do our business, and basically telling us how we're going to do our business in certain aspects. Technology investment is going to be needed, one, for brands that want their dealers to all behave the same way. So this is an opportunity for that to happen, much the same way that everybody has a DMS system and all of that. But the reality is that doesn't matter the size of the town. I think dealers are realizing that the citizens of those towns are still behaving in some way, shape, or form differently, and that they're going to have to change their business. So, you know, online signing of deals and things like that is now, you know, that wet signature thing is beginning to move aside. That happens in small towns as well as big towns. So you're going to have changes. Those changes are going to be demanded by the consumer, and to some extent demanded by the brand. And unfortunately, dealers are going to have to, if they want to stay at the forefront of building the trust with or rebuilding the trust with their customers, which are now fearful of going into stores, they're going to have to do a lot of the things that larger stores have had to do and will have to do. And it's not going to be a big store versus small store anymore, because the customer is the same type of customer. So the community is important, but also the capability of the dealership. I think the pandemic has told us that many dealers were not prepared to deal with the new way. Those are largely the ones that closed down entirely for 2-3 weeks before they reopened. But the whole getting the resources, getting the investment to do things differently, the small towns will definitely have to do the same thing. So getting resources up there could be an issue, depending on demand and the suppliers that they choose. But in reality, they can't afford otherwise. And this may be one of the areas where smaller dealers begin to make use of the capabilities that dealer groups have developed. So one of the things I wrote in the paper for CADA, Driving the Road, was that there could be a situation where smaller dealers in rural areas can't afford the cost of full compliance, but they could bolt on to what a large dealer group is doing. And maybe there's an opportunity for services of the large dealer group to sell that to the dealer. So instead of spending $30,000, $50,000, whatever the number has to be, for $999 a month, they can sign up and have a special field in the dealer groups activity. So there may be some things like that. There may be suppliers that will provide that service direct to dealers. We just have to wait and see, but they're gonna need it, no question about it, and it's going to be an increased cost.
And looking, I mean, resources is one thing, staffing is another. In a smaller market where maybe you don't have as varied and specialized a labor pool available, that can be a challenge too. It strikes me, one of the things we've talked about is likely the rise in importance of a BDC, for example. And how do you now staff for, train for? Is that a greater challenge in a market where you just don't have as deep a labor pool?
Yeah, it is, and it's all various degrees, right? So what you need in a 10,000 person town is a little bit different than you need in a 100,000 person town, but you still have the same need. So a BDC is a prime example where you might be able to share the BDC services of a larger group. But as we move to more appointment-based types of relationships, as opposed to just straight walk-ins, I think you're going to find the importance of the BDC in making sure that those appointments come in, booking those appointments, doing all that sort of stuff. And that's going to be regardless of any size of store, but it's going to be particularly important in small towns, especially if we don't open showrooms for another month or two. Those appointments are going to be really important. And if you get the mandate that once you open, you can't have more than 2 people in your showroom or whatever, you're going to be living on an appointment system. And that's going to have an HR impact, because you may not need as many salespeople, but you may need different types of people in the store to handle certain new aspects of the health and safety things that we're all going to have to deal with.
That certainly seems to be something I'm hearing a fair bit, that as dealers look at recalling staff or start to plan to recall staff as things ramp up. A comment I've heard a number of times is we need more people coming back, but we may need a different mix than what we had going into this.
That's correct. So the school's still out on that, but as they develop their own processes, as their local consumers begin to behave differently, they may very well have to change their processes, change the way that they've done things in the past, which means they may have different needs for different types of people. And some of those small communities may not have those types of people available, and that's where outsourcing comes from. And that's where suppliers may very well offer some services to help the smaller dealers out.
Let's just touch on the OEM side quickly. Within the OEM offices across the country, they are all working very aggressively to redesign processes, redesign experiences, trying to be out ahead of this to help all of their dealers move into the new normal. Is there a risk that the particular needs of a lower volume store don't get factored in to the extent they need to be?
That's always a risk. The OEMs are all, you're right, they're all taking time to figure out what this world is going to take a look like. They still have the mandate to sell lots of cars. They still have the mandate to sell parts. So how's that going to happen? And how is there a branding opportunity for health and safety within brands. So I don't think there is, but some always are looking at that and looking at health and safety of our stores as being a competitive advantage. But the health and safety has to happen in all stores. That's going to be government mandated. So I'm not sure that that's the approach. The discounting of the products and things like that to try to get the programs out for June and July to move product, that's going to benefit everybody. But I don't think that the OEs are going to, and I could be wrong, but I don't, and they probably won't be successful if they do, try to mandate how things are supposed to happen on the retail showroom, because there's still so much diversity in the types of communities and the types of ways of doing business that there is not one size that's going to fit all. And you're really going to have to leave it up to the individual within some sets of parameters, the individual dealer within sets of parameters, to run their own business the way you want it to be, with the outcomes that you want. So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all solution to this. And it's going to be different in Northern Quebec. It's going to be different in the Maritimes. It's going to be different in BC. It's going to be different in Southwestern Ontario. And the consistency is going to be the government mandates in each province, and what are you going to be allowed to do to conduct your business, or what are you going to have to do to conduct your business differently than what you did 4, 5, 6 months ago. And nobody knows this. This is all sort of pie in the sky type thinking in terms of what really is going to happen. There's no, as we said many times, there's no playbook for a pandemic. But the reality is that each individual community is going to have to treat their citizens as they have in the past in their own unique way that fits in their market within the government and brand mandates. And that's not a one size fits all type of solution.
We've seen that very clearly. CADA engaged us to produce a series of videos that we're actually working on right now, where we've been interviewing all the past laureate winners. And here you've got this incredible base of diverse dealers that have been at the top of their game from across the country. And we're often asking them how they're addressing similar things, and you're getting 20 completely different answers and different approaches. So to your point, one size does not fit all. It absolutely doesn't, and the pandemic doesn't change it.
Yeah, and I've said for a month or so now that profit is not going to be the motive anymore. It's going to be compliance with health and safety for a period of time, and we're going to all have to do things differently, if we agree with them or not. We're going to have to do them. A lot of smaller communities, I'm sure their citizens don't really pay much attention to COVID because they haven't had any and they're not traveling around. But it doesn't mean that the province that dealership is located in, or that town is located in, isn't going to require the same level of health and safety as another one. So we're entering into a new era of what's going to be important, and we're entering into an era of more government control in our day-to-day lives.
It's going to be interesting to see how, as we move to a more appointment-based relationship. If I think about how I deal with a lot of the providers I work with living in Toronto, I think that's fantastic. I think it's very convenient. I could see how, from a customer attitude in a smaller market where I'm used to being able to just walk into the dealership, I know the guys at the dealership, there may be more consumer resistance that they have to deal with.
Yeah, there could be. A lot of the small towns, like, people are out doing their grocery shopping, or it's a nice sunny day, they're walking around the neighborhood, they stop in and talk to their friends at the dealership. It's a whole different level of relationship with the customer, and you don't want that to stop. But if you're not allowed to do that, then how do you behave? So a lot of it is going to be, are there going to be different levels in different parts of the province that people are going to have to apply to? I don't know, but It's going to be harder on the small towns than it is on the bigger towns, no question.
Let's wind it up there. It's a Friday afternoon, and it looks like we're going to have the first really nice weekend in Southern Ontario. What have you got planned?
I think I'm just going to stay home.
Good. That was a trick question.
I figured it was.
All right, Chuck, look, thank you very much. As always, have a great weekend, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Have a good one.
Signing off.